families and businesses in England have once again steadfastly observed nationwide restrictions, and they've managed to slow the growth of new cases and ease the worst pressures on our NHS. I can therefore confirm the national restrictions in England will end on the 2nd of December, and they will not be renewed. From next Wednesday, people will be able to leave their home for any purpose and meet others in outdoor public spaces subject to the rule of 6. Collective worship, weddings and outdoor sports can resume, and shops, personal care, gyms and the wider leisure sector can reopen. But without sensible precautions, we would risk the virus escalating into a winter or New Year surge. The incidence of the disease is, alas, still widespread in many areas. So we're not going to replace national measures with a free-for-all, the status quo anti-COVID. We're going to go back instead to a regional tiered approach, applying the toughest measures where COVID is most prevalent. And while the previous local tiers did cut the number and cut the R number, they were not quite enough to reduce it below 1. So the scientific advice, I'm afraid, is that as we come out, our tiers need to be made tougher. In particular, in Tier 1, people should work from home wherever possible. In Tier 2, alcohol may only be served in hospitality settings as part of a substantial meal. In Tier 3, indoor entertainment, hotels and other accommodation will have to close, along with all forms of hospitality except for delivery and takeaways. And I'm very sorry, obviously, for the unavoidable hardship that this will cause for business owners who've already endured so much disruption this year. Mr. Speaker, unlike the previous arrangements, tiers will now be a uniform set of rules. We've also, and that's to say we won't have negotiations on additional measures with each region. It's a uniform set of rules. And we've learnt from experience that there are some things we can do differently. So from the 10 p.m. closing time for hospitality, we're going to change that so that it is last orders at 10 with closing at 11. In tiers 1 and 2, spectator sports and business events will be free to resume inside and outside with capacity limits and social distancing, providing more consistency with indoor performances in theatres and concert halls. We'll also strengthen the enforcement ability of local authorities, including especially trained officers and new powers to close down premises that pose a risk to public health. Later this week, I should say, we will announce which areas will fall into which tier, I hope on Thursday, based on analysis of cases in all age groups, especially the over 60s, also looking at the rate by which cases are rising or falling, the percentage of those tested in a local population who have COVID, and the current and projected pressures on the NHS. I'm sorry to say we expect that more regions will fall, at least temporarily, into higher levels than before. But by using these tougher tiers and by using rapid turnaround tests on an ever greater scale to drive R below 1 and keep it there, it should be possible for areas to move down the tiering scale to lower levels of restrictions. By maintaining the pressure on the virus, we can also enable people to see more of their family and friends over Christmas. Mr. Speaker, I can't say that Christmas will be normal this year, but in a period of adversity, time spent with loved ones is even more precious for people of all faiths and none. We all want some kind of Christmas. We need it. We certainly feel we deserve it. But what we don't want is to throw caution to the winds and allow the virus to flare up again, forcing us all back into lockdown in January. So to allow families to come together while minimizing the risk. We're working with the devolved administrations on a special time-limited Christmas dispensation, embracing the whole of the United Kingdom and reflecting the ties of kinship across our islands. But this virus obviously is not going to grant a Christmas truce. It doesn't know it's Christmas, Mr. Speaker, and families will need to make a careful judgment about the risk of visiting elderly relatives. We'll be publishing guidance for those who are clinically extremely vulnerable on how to manage the risks in each tier, as well as over Christmas. As we work to suppress the virus with these local tiers, 2 scientific breakthroughs will ultimately make these restrictions obsolete. As soon as a vaccine is approved, we will dispense it as quickly as possible. But given that this can't be done immediately, we will simultaneously use rapid turnaround testing, the lateral flow testing, that gives results within 30 minutes to identify those without symptoms so they can isolate and avoid transmission. We're beginning to deploy these tests in our NHS and in care homes in England, so people will once again be able to hug and hold hands with loved ones instead of waving at them through a window. By the end of the year, this will allow every care home resident to have 2 visitors who can be tested twice a week. Care workers looking after people in their own homes will be offered weekly tests from today. And from next month, weekly tests will also be available to staff in prisons, food manufacturing, and those delivering and administering COVID vaccines. We're also using testing, as the House knows, to help schools and universities stay open, and testing will enable students to know they can go home safely for Christmas, and indeed back from home to university. But there is another way of using these rapid tests. That is to follow the example of Liverpool, where in the last 2.5 weeks, over 200,000 people have taken part in a community testing, contributing to a very substantial fall in infections. So together with NHS Test and Trace and our fantastic armed forces, we will now launch a major community testing programme, offering all local authorities in Tier 3 areas in England a 6-week surge of testing. The system is untried and there are, of course, many unknowns, but if it works, we should be able to offer those who test negative the prospect of fewer restrictions, for example, meeting up in certain places with others who have also tested negative. And those towns and regions which engage in community testing will have a much greater chance of easing the rules, the tiering that they currently endure. Mr. Speaker, we will also use daily testing to ease another restriction that has impinged on many lives. We will seek to end automatic isolation for close contacts of those found positive. Beginning in Liverpool later this week, contacts who are tested every day for a week will only need to isolate if they themselves test positive. If successful, this approach will be extended across the health system next month and to the whole of England from January. And of course, we're working with the devolved administrations to ensure that Wales, Scotland, Northern Ireland also benefit, as they should and will, from these advances in rapid testing. But clearly, the most hopeful advance of all is how vaccines are now edging ever closer to liberating us from the virus, demonstrating emphatically that this is not a pandemic without end. We can take great heart from today's news, which has the makings of a wonderful British scientific achievement. The vaccine, developed with astonishing speed by Oxford University and AstraZeneca, is now one of 3 capable of delivering a period of immunity. We don't yet know when any will be ready and licensed, but we have ordered 100 million doses of the Oxford vaccine and over 350 million in total, more than enough for everyone in the UK, the Crown dependencies, and the overseas territories. And the NHS is preparing a nationwide immunisation programme ready next month, the like of which we've never witnessed. Mr. Speaker, 2020 has been in many ways a tragic year when so many have lost loved ones and faced financial ruin, and this will be still a hard winter. Christmas cannot be normal, and there's a long road to spring, but we have turned a corner and the escape route is in sight. We must hold out against the virus until testing and vaccines come to our rescue and reduce the need for restrictions. And everyone can help speed up the arrival of that moment by continuing to follow the rules, getting tested and self-isolating when instructed, remembering hands, face, space, and pulling together for one final push to the spring when we have every reason to hope and believe that the achievements of our scientists will finally lift the shadow of this virus. And Mr. Speaker, I commend this statement to the House.
Can I just say, the Prime Minister, it's a big statement, he ran 3 minutes over, so can I say to the opposition an extra 2 minutes and to the SNP an extra minute? I now call the Leader of the Opposition, Right Honourable Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank the Prime Minister for advance sight of his statement and for his telephone call earlier today when he set out a summary of the proposal. Let me start with the good news. The tremendous progress on vaccines. Last week, the Shadow Chancellor and I went to the Oxford Vaccine Group at Oxford University. It was inspiring, it is remarkable to see the work that they are doing. And our thanks, and I think of the whole nation, go to all those who've taken part in the vaccine trials and research, and we wish them Godspeed. I also want to make an open offer to the Prime Minister. Labour will provide any support we can in the national effort to deliver the vaccine safely across the country. That's an open offer. Can I also welcome the fact that the Prime Minister is seeking a 4-nation approach on the arrangements over the Christmas period. We'll obviously await details on this and the evidence that supports the steps being taken, but the 4-nation approach is the right approach. Now for the more difficult bit. The vaccine is the light at the end of the tunnel. The question today is how do we get there and protect lives and livelihoods along the way? The Prime Minister proposes a return to the 3-tier system. That's risky, because the previous 3-tier system didn't work. Tier 1 areas drifted to Tier 2. Almost all Tier 2 areas ended up in Tier 3, and those in Tier 3 couldn't see a way out, and we ended up in national lockdown. That was the sad reality of the tiered system before, and nobody wants a repeat of that. Now, I accept that the new tiers are different to the old tiers, but many of the questions are the same. They're not trick questions, and I do acknowledge that none of this is easy. But if the Prime Minister is going to carry Parliament and the country on this, they do need answering. Firstly, on the tier system. The Prime Minister touched on this, but which local areas will be in each tier? This is the red-hot question. This is the question everybody's going to be asking over their kitchen table tonight. I had a round table with business leaders this morning, and it's the first question they asked me. The Prime Minister says it will be decided later this week, possibly Thursday. I just can't emphasise how important it is that these decisions are taken very quickly and very clearly so everybody can plan. That's obviously particularly important for the millions who are in restrictions before the national lockdown, because the message to them today seems to be you will almost certainly be back where you were before the national lockdown, probably in even stricter restrictions. And people need to know that so that they can plan for that. And I really emphasise how important that is for the Prime Minister. Secondly, and the Prime Minister said he wanted uniform rules. Will the tiers simply be imposed region by region, come what may, from the 3rd of December? Or will there be an element of local consultation and negotiation? I understand the uniform rules, but simply to impose it runs the risk of not getting buy-in from local leaders and local communities, which is incredibly important to people complying with the rules. Third, how long does the Prime Minister anticipate each local area will remain in each tier? For those that are going to come out of lockdown and almost certainly go back to more restrictions than they left, that's going to be a very, very pressing question for them. And then fourth, will there be a new economic package to accompany these new tiers? There's huge concern among many businesses about the viability in Tier 3, particularly a strengthened Tier 3. So what new support can they expect? And can I touch again on those who are self-employed, who are outside of the self-employed scheme, the so-called excluded, because they will be hearing a message about the next 3 months in relation to schemes that they are not currently in, and that needs urgently to be addressed. Could I then turn to the public health impact of this approach? Because one of the major reasons that we ended up in a national lockdown was because, in the words of the government's own scientific advisors, SAGE, test, trace and isolate was only having a marginal impact on transmission. It's one of the reasons they suggested a national lockdown, marginal impact on transmission. Now, I know the Prime Minister will talk about increased testing, mass testing, that's welcome, but it's only part of the story, because the other two parts, trace and isolate, are not fit for purpose. SAGE advised and continues to advise that for trace and isolate to be effective, the percentage of contacts traced needs to be about 80%. It's currently nowhere near that level, it's never been near that level, and the figures are not getting any better. The latest figures actually show that every week about 120,000 close contacts, that's people who should be self-isolating, are not being traced by the system. The likelihood of getting the virus under control when 120,000 people who should be self-isolating are moving around their communities is very low. And then only a fraction of people able to self-isolate are doing so when asked to do so. Now, we said to the Prime Minister this needed to be fixed in the period of the national lockdown, and it hasn't been. It's barely mentioned in the Prime Minister's statement today, and many people will be forgiven for thinking that the Prime Minister's given up on trace and isolate and is about to abandon that scheme altogether to reach out for a different scheme, the mass testing. And it's very important that we understand that if we're going into a tiered system, abandoning trace and isolate, or not getting trace and isolate where it is, we are running a major risk. Mr. Speaker, this isn't about knocking those on the front line or knocking those working on track and trace. It's about being grown up about risk. If we're reintroducing a 3-tier system without having fixed trace and isolate, that is a major risk, and we all need to acknowledge it, because it begs the million-dollar question, which is how confident is the Prime Minister that the approach he's proposing today will keep the R rate below 1? Because if it doesn't, the infections will go up, they will go back out of control, and we could well be back in a national lockdown. That is the million-dollar question. Mr. Speaker, Labour has backed the Prime Minister on all the big decisions the government's had to take to protect public health, including the 2 national lockdowns. We've done so because we want there to be a national consensus on difficult issues like this, and because we'll always put public health first. Ideally, I would like to be in a position to do so again. But there are huge gaps in this plan, huge uncertainties and huge risks. We will await the detail. We want the Prime Minister to get this right. He's got a week to do so. Can he start by answering these straightforward questions? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Prime Minister.
Yes, Mr. Speaker. Well, I'd like to thank the right honourable gentleman for his qualified welcome of these measures. He says that they are risky. It's not quite clear whether he's supporting them or not. I think they're the right thing for the country. I think they're the right way of getting the virus down. If he wants to go back into another, we'll keep a national lockdown on, I don't think that's the right way forward for this country. We want to get the economy moving as far as we possibly can, keep schools open whilst suppressing the virus. He asked when we'll make the announcement about who goes into which tier. As I said to him earlier on, and I said in my statement just now, that will be announced on Thursday. The reason for the delay, Mr. Speaker, is quite simply that we need to to see the data as it comes in. And of course, we will work with local authority leaders about which tiers that they need to apply. We'll discuss it with them, but in the end, we have to take some decisions and get on and do it. And I think we saw from the last experience, it was those local authorities, Liverpool springs to mind, that went early, that were very collaborative, where they've been most successful actually in getting the incidents down. And some of the things that we'll look at in deciding which tier is appropriate, Mr. Speaker: case detection rates in all groups, case detection rates in the over 60s, the rate at which the cases are rising or falling, the positivity rate overall, and the pressures on the NHS in the region. Those are the things that we will be looking at, Mr. Speaker, as we make our judgment. And they clearly, in some ways, the tiers have been changed. I mentioned the point about curfews. There are extra possibilities for indoor and outdoor sports, as I said in my statement, and indoor and outdoor events, as I said in my statement. It is right that the balance of the impact of these should continue to be tough. And he once again criticises NHS test and trace. Mr. Speaker, people should bear in mind that this operation has helped indisputably in identifying the areas that have the greatest prevalence of disease. It's helped us to drive down that disease in those areas. It's been of immense value. They're now testing, they have capacity of 500,000 a day. They've tested, NHS Test and Trace has done more than any other country in Europe. And what is so exciting about the new lateral flow testing is that when it comes to isolate, there is the prospect of using lateral flow tests, as I said, to check whether or not you're actually infected or infectious, and thereby to obviate the need for the 14-day quarantine. So science is really beginning to ride to our rescue, Mr. Speaker, and it's in that context, with the combination of a tiering system and lateral flow tests and the gradual rollout in the weeks and months ahead of the vaccine, that we're able to come out of the lockdown next Wednesday and make the progress that we've described. I'm grateful to the Right Honourable Gentleman for such support as he felt able to offer at this stage. I'm aware that his support is one of those things that kind of now you see it, now you don't. But never mind, I'll take it while it seems to be there, at least temporarily, and look forward to further conversations with him next week.
David Green.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. After the tremendous news about testing and the encouraging developments on vaccines, can I welcome the news that the blanket national lockdown is ending? But in the spirit of a wise constituent who told me that if the government imposes stupid rules, we'll all stop obeying the sensible rules as well, can I ask my right honourable friend that the new tiers be imposed at a local level, districts rather than counties or regions, because restrictions which people feel are unfair to their particular community will simply not be respected or obeyed, and this will itself have a damaging effect on our long-term health.
Prime Minister.
My right honourable friend, and indeed the wisdom of his constituent, but I respectfully disagree. The people of this country have been obeying the rules, and it's to an astonishing degree, thanks to the heroic effort of the people of this country in following the guidance, in following the recent measures, that we've got the R down in the way that we have, and we've got the incidence down in some of those areas where the disease was really taking off. If you look at the graphs in the northwest in particular, it's now starting to track down across the country, and I have every confidence in the wisdom of the British people to follow sensible guidance and sensible rules. And on his point about local versus regional, alas, the disease is no respecter of borough boundaries, and we have to have some regions in which to constitute the tiers that are sensible and large enough.
Right, let's head up to Scotland with the SNP leader, Ian Blackford. Ian Blackford.
I would like to thank the Prime Minister for advance sight of his statement and for his telephone call earlier today. Mr. Speaker, this morning, people right across these islands woke up to the more encouraging news on the development of vaccines to fight this deadly virus. It is right that we pay tribute to the remarkable efforts of thousands of scientists across the world who've worked at unprecedented speed to produce these vaccines. All those scientists offer us hope that there is a way out of this pandemic based on the primacy of safety for our society. Far too often in the recent past, expertise in science has been questioned or demeaned by right-wing politicians. So let's now ensure that those same politicians never forget it is a commitment and dedication to science that is now coming to our society's rescue. Mr. Speaker, whilst we all welcome that hope on the horizon, there remain for far too many of our citizens who have not received a single penny of support since the beginning of this pandemic. 3 million freelancers, sole traders, and the recently self-employed all remain excluded from any of the economic support established by this Tory government. These include people right across our community: painters, bricklayers, musicians, artists, entrepreneurs and plumbers. Because of the choices made by this Tory government, they now face a Christmas with no help and no support. Mr. Speaker, myself and my party have now been raising this issue since March, 8 months ago. The excluded are not asking for any special treatment, but just looking for some of the same fairness that others have seen. Others have received support. They should also be getting it. Prime Minister, the Chancellor's spending review this Wednesday will take place exactly 1 month from Christmas Day. So I have one very specific question. Will the Prime Minister today guarantee that a package of financial support will finally be put in place for the 3 million people who have been excluded from any economic support? Will there be some pre-Christmas cheer for the 3 million who have been excluded from help so far?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, and I think I don't know who the right honourable gentleman means in his attack on those who don't encourage investment in science. He certainly can't mean this government, because we put forward the biggest ever programme of investment in R&D, and indeed are creating advanced research projects facility that will rival that of, we hope, of the United States. We're investing in pure science and applied science at a scale undreamt of by any previous government. I think rising to £22 billion a year at the end of the spending review period. So I really don't know who he's talking about, but it is not whichever right-wing foes the right honourable gentleman has in view. It cannot be this government. On his point about supporting the self-employed, look, this has been very, very difficult, Mr. Speaker, and we're doing whatever we can to help the self-employed and the excluded. 13.5 billion has gone so far, I think more now, to support the self-employed. Those that, particularly in the artistic, cultural sectors, are beneficiaries of the £1.57 billion investment in the arts and culture. But the best thing for everybody is there are many things that apply generally, such as the cut on VAT and the bounce back loans of all kinds that are available to and the grants that are available to everybody. But the best thing for everybody in all sectors is to get the economy moving again, to get the virus down and to move forward. And that's the objective of this winter plan.
Mark Harper.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. First of all, Prime Minister, can I thank you for agreeing to meet myself and my honourable friend, the member for Wickham, on behalf of the 70 colleagues who wrote to you at the weekend. We look forward to discussing this matter in more detail later. I think many will hold their judgment on this until we know which areas go into which tiers. I think if you go into tier 3, you'll struggle to spot much of a difference from the lockdown. But can I ask the Prime Minister to set out for each of the restrictions which have such an impact on people and businesses, the impact he's expecting it to have on dealing with COVID, but also the non-COVID health impact and, importantly, the impacts on people's livelihoods, so that we know each measure is going to save more lives than it costs?
Prime Minister.
Yes, indeed, Mr. Speaker. We'll be very happy, and I'm delighted to meet my right honourable friend and the honourable member for Wickham, who've written an excellent letter to me. Many of the points I hope that he agrees in that letter were answered in my statement about sport, the curfew, non-essential retail, gyms, personal.
Have you pressed the button, Prime Minister? Prime Minister. Right. I think we're just going to have to stop for a moment so we can have it checked. We're just checking the sound, Prime Minister. We lost your answer. Have you pressed the button by mistake? Muted.
There's nothing wrong now. There's nothing wrong on our end.
It's not our end, Prime Minister. It could well be yours. I wonder if Mr. Hancock would like to take over with the answer. Is one of you going to do it or not? So he's looking at each other. Sorry? We're going to suspend for 3 minutes then. Okay. In order to allow the safe exit, I'm now going to suspend the House for 3 minutes.
Some problem with the sound.
Right, before we get too carried away, until we get the Prime Minister back, we will continue with the questions. If you could pick up the answer that we lost halfway through, is that all right for the Secretary of State for Health?
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. What I'd say to my right honourable friend, in addition to what the Prime Minister said before we lost the audio, is that while the Tier 3 restrictions that have been set out are less stringent than the national lockdown, it is necessary to be able to get the R down under the tiered system to avoid a further national lockdown if the cases still go up. And as we've set out, We have seen some areas of the country see the case rates come down, and now, thankfully, nationally we're seeing the case rates come down. To his final point about the other health and economic impacts, we of course recognise the economic impacts. On the other health impacts, I would simply reiterate what I've said many times before, which is that the health impacts of not locking down and of the spread of the coronavirus going too broad on other health conditions other than coronavirus are also bad, and the best way to protect the health of the nation, both from coronavirus and from all other conditions, is to keep the virus under control.
David.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think it makes the case for investing in broadband. Can I ask the Secretary of State, though, very seriously, from the lack of tests and PPE, the claims about a protective ring around care homes, while people died in horrifying numbers, the government's abject failure to protect care home residents and care staff has been one of the biggest tragedies of this pandemic. So will the Secretary of State guarantee today that no care home in England will be required or pressurised to admit anyone from an NHS hospital